The 10th of July 2019 was a very sad day for you and I. In the last few months, our dearest Mush cat, had been taking medication for kidney failure, a condition that I was told is very common in cats, and a condition that could mean that she had weeks, months, or years left to live, but that at only 7 years old she was in decline. I had taken her to the vet's a year previously as I'd noticed her peeing in unusual locations a couple of times. Back then, the vet had put it down to a change in her litter box, as the man that I was seeing for a brief period insisted that I had an enclosed box for my cats to protect his delicate senses. Incidentally, this was the same man who, within the next year, moved his things out of our apartment 3 times after arguments, despite the fact that he originally was only meant to be staying with us for 2 weeks. After dropping out of his military training because he was unhappy with feedback he'd received from peers. I'd agreed to 2 weeks because he'd wanted to move down to Stockholm to be closer to me. But as the weeks crept into months, I started to feel resentment that my boundaries weren't being respected. He couldn't grasp how the 18 months in which he'd ended up sticking around, eventually renting a room from an older lady who excitedly told me cooked for him but didn't like that she was too much in his business. In the end, as you might remember, I had enough, and I asked him outright if he even wanted to be with me, after he told me that his dad thought I clearly didn't care for him at all with my cold-hearted arguing. Upset, he told me he wasn't sure if he wanted to be with me, and in deciding that we both deserved better, and how the situation was turning out, he retorted to describing ways in which I'd emasculated him during our time together. One such occasion included repeatedly nudging his knees together on a train on a journey in which he'd manspread so far the poor lady next to him had shrunk up against the wall in the corner of the seat, being too polite to say anything, but giving me that grateful look that women have sometimes when men are called out on their bad behavior. But anyway, he was never much of a cat person, which again I try not to judge him for, but in retrospect, I took far too much guidance on how to make my home welcoming for him. And whilst he was around for 18 months of your 11 years, there's a very clear reason that he is referred to that guy who stuck around for a while. I digress. Avoiding the topic at hand, no doubt. The vet had told me it was a behavioral retaliation, and I had accepted that my otherwise very well behaved cat was maybe angry at the sudden change of litter box. I tried to keep the flap permanently open as a sign of support, and the peeing didn't happen again for a while. When it did reoccur, she was starting to pee on the giant beanbag that I had bought years before. It'd been her favorite spot to lie, and there didn't seem to be any other type of dominant behaviors, so I took her back again as I noticed a change in her already small appetite. They ran tests and let me know that she had some kidney failure, but offered me some medication to help, suggested I keep an eye on her. But within 3 months, she seemed to go downhill from a cat that occasionally didn't get to the toilet in time to a cat that was low in energy, uninterested in much, sleeping even more than cats already do, and so I took her back. They told me that unfortunately it was now much worse, that I needed to consider her quality of life. It was the first time I had to take the responsibility for the life of another entirely myself. I felt pulled between feeling like I was giving up on her too quickly because I was struggling to watch her decline, which felt so selfish, or prolonging her suffering in hope that it wasn't as bad as it looked, which also felt selfish. With a heavy heart, I made the choice to help I go to sleep. And while she still wanted to be around me and give me all the love she could, she was barely even lying in a cat-like way. She was sprawled on her belly with her limbs seemingly too heavy to organize, her head flopped down, unless you were talking to her. Second Daddy and I sat with her on the balcony all morning, trying to do the things that we knew that she loved to do, bathing in sunshine, telling her how wonderful she was, how much we loved her. But then we put her in the cat carrier and set off towards the vet's. As we walked down the street and towards the train, you ran after us. Having been outside all morning, as you often were, I think you knew she was sick, and strangely, you ran after her in that cat carrier, making a meow sound I only ever saw you make on that occasion. I remember turning to Second Daddy and saying, I think he knows. Life without Mushroom was hard. She had been the first addition to our family, the mother of your kittens, and quite frankly, one of my best friends. Whilst I am a girl who has always seemed to have had friends, I often feel that there was a strange wall between me and other people, in which I was emulating being a human being rather than actually being one. In particular, the months after the divorce, where I had gotten unexplainably sick for months on end, it was you three who kept me company. Feeding you three was the reason I got up in the morning, without question. You kept a rhythm to my life and made me more functional, a sort of heartbeat that repeated day in, day out when people were disappointing me, as well as the high points when you were also always there. Having to say goodbye to a family member that happens to be a cat is never easy. But even though relationships with loved ones had come and gone, there was a consistency to my relationship with cats that was more comforting than anything a person could offer me. The feeling when cats, known for being independent and aloof, actually choose to spend time with you is so much more meaningful than humans performing normative and socially expected functions. I was lost without Mushroom. Blue, at that point, had run away, and whilst you were there doing the best you could to comfort me, you had your day to day, which involved being outside and around. My home was empty. My heart was empty. And more than ever, my life was feeling empty. I was already struggling with burnout, unable to sleep and eat regularly. I was in a bit of a spiral, not getting any useful solutions from doctors, therapists alike. I think I was already written off at work at this point, although looking back, it's a bit of a blur. In which case, I was attending therapy, taking sleeping pills, and doing whatever I could to break out of this zombie like state that was the result of being too tired to sleep. Hours of laying awake at night, not knowing what to focus on, to calm and regulate my nervous system. I felt resentment towards food, unworthy of showers, and overall, I felt like the world had been telling me that I didn't deserve to be alive. It might have been that summer that I would try and force myself outside to go and walk, and I would imagine how it would be to die. Hanging myself from different trees by the lake, probably at sunrise, definitely in summer. Light and sound seemed distorted, as you might expect, with little or no rest. There were days I felt like I was walking around, like I was in a movie. Everything was surreal. I recognize now that a lot of this sounds like depression, but at the time, I would have said I didn't really feel depressed. I didn't really feel anything until nighttime when all I would feel was anxiety. Going to bed felt like sitting down for an unexpected exam in which you don't even know what you were supposed to be tested on. and if it was a topic you'd even learned. Somehow, somewhere, between awful and strangely abstract and surreal, the little sleep I did get, I'd wake up sore, like my whole body, as if I had constant muscle tension. I'd twitching muscles. At some point, I transitioned from eating a couple of slices of brown toast with butter a day to being able to eat some fast food again. But my brain and my body were eating themselves, and I couldn't understand why. I thought back to the more extreme training schedule and eating habits I had had a few years earlier. Double gym classes in a day, walking an hour to and from work to ensure I was burning more calories than I was eating, drinking red wine instead of eating dinner, as a way to help get myself to sleep. A habit I had been encouraged to do by my father since my teenage years. I was angry, feeling shame, full of self resentment, that I couldn't just pick myself up like I'd been taught that I always had to. I felt like my struggle was illogical and therefore didn't have the right to exist. I had a good job. I bought myself a home. Finally had some security. I had friends, but I felt like I was living on a planet far away from everybody else. When I was first put on sick leave, people expressed play jealousy. Lucky you, they'd say. All that time to catch up with television. Except I couldn't watch television. I couldn't focus on anything. Storylines, characters, conversations just blurred into this big mess of noise, like somebody was playing about 30 songs on top of each other and then forcing me to stay awake every night in the darkness of Swedish winter where nothing would open until 6 a.m. I'd be counting down the minutes and the hours just trying to get through the night, every night. Eventually, I decided enough was enough, and whilst I was suffering a lot with feeling unwell, I decided to soothe my grief by looking at kittens online. I looked at shelters, I looked at breeders, I had no idea how to move forwards, and then I spotted Kira, a white cat with odd eyes, meaning heterochromia, or different colored eyes. I asked Second Daddy to go with me one day to take a look. I felt like I was disrespecting Mushroom's memory, but I also knew in the core of my pain that she loved me and she wouldn't want me to continue, and she would want me to continue to love others in her absence. Grieving her loss wasn't going to bring her back. Second Daddy had agreed to come with me to visit, which you're supposed to do before cats are ready to leave their mothers, so the family can decide if you're a good match. And he suggested I hold off making any decisions whilst on this emotional roller coaster, which was fair, and off we went. When I turned up to the home, there were kittens running around all over the place. I got to meet the mother, and I was told the father lived there too, but he was an outdoors cat, not home in that moment. They picked a tiny Kieran Reese up and handed this little white package to me to hold. Now, I'm inclined to fall in love a bit too easily, as you probably realize from some of my choices of men. But with Kira, the bond was so instantaneous that any anxieties or doubts I had about never being able to love another cat after the mushroom disappeared. She looked up at me with her tiny kitten features, bold and curious. She started sniffing my face and wiggling around, wanting to get closer to me and explore me. The lack of fear at this huge, unfamiliar human didn't seem to concern her at all. And so I went against my word, and I decided on the spot, if the family would accept me, that this tiny child was going to come and live with me. I told the family about you and explained the situation with Mushroom, and they seemed to understand. They seemed to agree that I was a caring person and a good match for this baby Snowball, and that I could come and pick her up in a few weeks when she was grown enough to leave home and start her new life. And I was thrilled. Getting Kira home brought new life and energy into my apartment. First, I struggled to find a name that I felt would be worthy of this source of joy, but in the end, I settled on Kiranuris, partly because of my appreciation for sci-fi, but also as a nod towards Fantasy Kira, the Gelfling from Dark Crystal. You had been named Ludo after the incredible orange beast from the classic movie The Labyrinth. Not the game, as many had assumed, due to my background of working in the games industry. You were not overly impressed with a new baby in our home. You were already out most of the time, but, if possible, you made a point to be outside a little extra when she arrived. She was energetic, running circles around you, and needed to learn some respect, which she did. She would climb everything, which frightened me at first because she seemed so small. But she had a good feel for balance, distances, and risk. So, as we got to know each other, you taught her how to cat, and you kept her in line. After a couple of weeks, it occurred to me that her energy was boundless. I'd forgotten how hard it was raising baby animals, having to be constantly alert of anything they might try and eat or play with could mean danger, and I was so tired in the day and unable to match her appetite for play. I felt a pang of guilt, knowing that she was giving me everything I needed, but she didn't have anybody able to keep up with her. You had had Mushroom. While she looked down on you, she was still your age and had given into playing playing with you somewhat. Hmm. Blue had had noodles and miso. Kira had nobody. You were out all day, had no interest in playing childish games, and I just couldn't figure out how. So I went back online to look for a friend. I knew it was a bad idea, but I felt really unkind not having a little friend for Kira, for her to do the things that she liked to do. So I went and picked up Balana a few weeks later. She'd been from a litter of two, and her sister had just left home, meaning she also needed somebody to play with. She, Balana, like Kira, was white, and I wondered if it would help them feel like siblings somehow. Whilst Kira was odd-eyed, with one blue eye and one green, yellow, brown eye, Balana had two big blue eyes that seemed to match Kira's energy, and I couldn't wait to introduce them. Now, there had been some initial hissing from Kira. I think realizing that you're not the baby anymore is difficult for any big sister. It wasn't unlike when Mushroom met you for the first time. Although Balana didn't hide out of the way, she tested her boundaries and got to know her new home. You were probably rolling your eyes. It was enough with one baby at home, but two? As time went on, Kira and Balana got to understand each other. They were a force to be reckoned with. Like two small hurricanes tearing through the place. Balana, in particular, adored you, much to your annoyance. You wanted to be left alone in peace. You wanted human attention, food, freedom. You didn't have time for silly little girls. And if Balana got too bold or too close to you, you would remind her with a casual hiss or a raised paw. I later came to realize that Balana was mostly, if not entirely, deaf. The vet confirmed that it's very common with white cats with blue eyes, and I suspected why there were certain cues that she struggled to pick up more on, like the subtle little growls that you'll do on occasion if she's pushing her lug. When it was feeding time, the others would respond to the sound of the cupboard opening, no matter where they were or what they were doing. But it took her a while to understand why her playmates would disappear mid-play so suddenly, all tearing off towards the kitchen. As she learned her environment, You learned how to predict her, but on occasion, you even played back very slightly, and she longed for those moments. I'd sometimes see her watching you, backing up, getting ready to run towards you, not seeming to care that you were already aware of her intentions from the noise that she was making during the process. She also looked up to you as an outdoors cat. Being that she is likely deaf, I cannot imagine any environment in which she would be able to roam with the freedoms you have enjoyed over the years. Whilst you were so aware of your environment, whether cars, children, dogs, she would not be. It has not stopped her from trying and succeeding to escape on several occasions. One summer's day, I casually saw her walking past the window on the window frame, looking in at me and second daddy, who had to double take before realizing she had mastered the window fittings, designed to allow only air conditioning pipes out, keeping cats in. It had failed. I had to run outside after her, but she was mostly too fascinated by the world and wanted to sniff everything, thus not got very far. But she is highly adventurous, and always excited to sniff you when you came in from having been outside. You were quite a role model for her to look up to, from many perspectives, even if you didn't always like being the center of her attention. Balana learned to sit for food the way that you did. I can only assume from observing your behavior, your focus on doing the thing that you knew would impress. It was more of a coincidence that we had trained the word sit with a hand gesture. In trying to learn how to communicate with you, I had explored both audio and visual cues, which incidentally seemed to work best when paired together. Luckily for me, it meant that when Balana turned up, she could observe our process, and whilst Kira and Blue seemed to respond better to a soothing voice as a reminder to help them calm down amidst the exciting chaos that is food time, Balana has a calmer approach. I've noticed that she seems to get a particular type of joy from being able to communicate predictably, even if it means misbehaving. She has an air of mischief that I think you knew well, scratching up my pleather gaming chair while staring me in the eye defiantly, a naughty glee emanating from her big blue almond-shaped eyes. There were times that she would have to stretch her neck back so incredibly far just to look at me behind her. It was almost as though she enjoyed watching the situation unfold. It didn't seem to be about her claws at all, as she also liked to occasionally impress me by using the scratch pad, possibly to see what difference it made, me getting excited, praising her visually and audibly in our own tailored communication style. You showed me that when I praised the good behavior consistently, you could use it as a way for asking for my attention when you needed something. And I felt like I struggled to connect with Balana initially, but implying that consistent predictability theory, I found that she came out of her shell more, and we seemed to start bonding easier. She learned to sit from observing you and observing the response to my impressed behavior. And I think it opened up a curiosity in her that I've tried my best to nurture. I found that she would stare at me intently, which all of my cats do when trying to tell me something. It's almost as though there's a belief that if you stare intensely enough, it will somehow invent telepathic communication between us. And at times, I would agree we've been close. Hmm. You behaved as cats do when it came to going outside. If you were inside, you probably wanted to be outside, but not in the rain, not in the snow. You didn't mind the cold, much to my concern. In the winters, you were more indoors, regularly checking the weather outdoors. When you wanted to do that through the balcony, it was relatively easy to manage. But I had to be careful that Blue and Balana didn't make a break for freedom to come and join you in your outdoors adventures. But once you realized how to find ways of coming in the front door of the building, you started to insist that you could also be let out that way. First thing in the morning, when I had barely woken up and I was dressed for bed, I was very reluctant to facilitate this in case a neighbor came out and saw me with bed hair and pajamas. But still, you would insist. You had come to realize that this was how other neighbors had to enter and exit the building, making it a great sniffing area and no doubt information on who had passed through the hall recently. I would push the button to open the door and go outside to check for dogs in the vicinity. Once I had given you the all clear, you'd make your way outside and decide if it was a day for hiding, a day for relaxing. Sometimes, in the time it took for the door to close again, you would have changed your mind and run back indoors, following me back into the apartment. Ordinarily, you'd want to try again within about 15 minutes, which could repeat if your observations called for it. It was just taking out the trash to throw it in a chute nearby. You'd run with me, do a quick lap checking the vicinity. Sometimes you'd run up a tree in the courtyard the way you used to in the forest. It was very impressive. I could never tell if you were keeping me company, protecting me, or trying to insist that we go out for a walk together. Nonetheless, it was one of those short moments in which we relied on our connection. Without language, we would find ways to communicate risk, mood, and plans. The number of times I told you no, and you'd protest by sitting in front of the door, staring forwards, trying to use your determination to change my mind. You'd try and get my attention by doing things that you knew I'd praise you for, like scratching the scratch pad whilst making eye contact, demonstrating that you recognize that this was the preferred use of furniture, and in return, you would like to ask me a favor. If that didn't work, you might take the risk and do something naughty, like actually scratching the furniture in an attempt to break my patience and let you out in frustration. You were very good at reading people. You could read me like a book, and you were persistent in communicating your needs even when I was wrapped up in something else. You would sometimes sit patiently in front of me, staring at me intently until I noticed. That was your polite way of making a request. You knew that demonstrating good behavior and being patient in asking for my time, I'd investigate why you were giving me so much attention. When I would move towards you, you'd happily walk off, expecting me to follow and understand what it was that you were asking for. If it was food you wanted, you'd lead me over to the food bowl, sit politely, the same action we had practiced since you were a kitten. It was often your way of letting me know you didn't like some food I'd given you. I'd put the bowl back in front of you again, stroking your head and affirming, good boy, you can have it. If you didn't like the food, if you didn't want to eat the food, you would avoid looking at it, making it clear that you were looking anywhere else but not able to see what I was giving you. To be clear, I'm not proud of the baby speak we had, but I found myself being mindful to speak using tones and words that were simple to understand. It's crossed my mind that maybe our friendship was delusions and projections of a lonely woman who was struggling to connect with people. But I will still stand by the claim that we had our own language, our own ways of communicating approval or disapproval. I don't think we would have been able to adapt the way we did through these 11 years otherwise. It was seeing your grumpy old man reaction to the girls that landed us in the vets again. Whilst I understood your sentiment, you seemed a little bit too short-tempered, and it was generally out of character. You had started grumbling at me as well, not as a point of aggression, but you clearly wanted to be left alone, which was concerning for a cat who was notoriously social. The vets checked you over, took your blood work, and claimed nothing serious came back. But you clearly had arthritis in all four of your legs as well as your back. All things considered, you were incredibly ungrumbly, given how much you were probably in pain. You started on some medication to help with the pain, but we had to try a few different options because at first it was making you sick. Eventually, we found the sweet spot and got into the habit of giving you your medicine every day on a little teaspoon. I'd learned from experiences of trying to give you deworming tablets that if we could be on the same side and use the carrot rather than the stick approach, it was better for everybody involved. You were incredibly talented at finding any piece of deworming tablet I had hidden in an exciting treat and spitting it out the side of your mouth, barely noticeable but for the flick of your head where a piece of tablet would go flying across the room. You received a treat after your medicine, and so it became a fun game in which you would come and remind me at medicine time, knowing that you were going to get attention, praise, and a treat to boot. It was a good system, and you were a good boy. A neighbor had reached out to ask if you were okay after they saw you sleeping one summer afternoon on somebody's balcony, as you often did, but they had commented on that you seemed extra tired somehow. Even though they were used to seeing you soak up the long summer days, as only a cat knows how, that they felt some concern and wanted to let me know. I explained that you were getting older now and you're probably resting your arthritis in the sun, but thank you for giving me a heads up and I'll keep an eye on it. I watched you sleep a lot over the next year, partly because you slept more than usual, which didn't seem as concerning as mushroom, but I noticed you breathed quite quickly. When you were a young cat, you clearly used to have vivid dreams. I could watch your breathing, pick up your muscles twitch and the occasional noise, and I often wondered what you were dreaming about. Catching mice, perhaps, running through forest together. Maybe you had memories of Nina's ham or the elderly people from the home in Alvik. This was different, though. You didn't appear to be dreaming so much, just breathing as if you had run in from outside. Not panting, but not really resting either. Looking back, you did use to pant on occasion, like if we just really run fast together in the forest. Perhaps you'd defy gravity as you ran up and down trees, as casually as a person would maybe change direction from left to right. When we would sit down together, you would pant a little like a dog. Given that you did so many other things as dogs did, fetching, sitting, coming when called, I started to wonder if maybe you'd just grown up around dogs in your early life, or picked things up from watching them in the forest. Regardless, we went back to the vet's, where she listened to your heart and took your blood to be tested again. This time, they decided to send us to a cardiac clinic, which obviously didn't feel like good news, but I wasn't sure what to expect. Given that there were no cardiac clinics around where we lived, I had to put in a character and grab a taxi to Dandrid. You were very angry at me. When you were younger and small enough, I'd generally not put you in a carrier too often. Instead, I'd put you on a leash on your collar or a harness and put you into like a shoulder bag I had. You didn't mind being carried, and the bag was mostly zipped closed, but you liked the security of being able to push your nose out and watch what was going on. Or if things were scary, to hide away in the bag. You liked being at my side, where I could drop my hand in to stroke you and give you comfort, not like a cat carrier that acts as a little prison, bars, barriers, very little access between us. So you wailed all the way in the taxi. Taxi driver was understanding. We were going to a vet's clinic after all, but your angry shouts of protest were incessant. I felt like I had betrayed you and the trust that we shared between us at one point. The vet took a listen to your chest and brought up an ultrasound on his screen to see what was going on. He said you had an arrhythmia or a murmur. That again, a very common defect in cats that led to heart disease. That you already had a very enlarged heart, and that the thickening of the heart wall meant that your heart was struggling to pump properly, filling your lungs with liquid as a result. I asked what that meant, Didn't sound good, but how worried should I be? Ultimately, he explained that the heart disease was pretty advanced, and whilst he could give you some medication to help clear your lungs, that I needed to consider your life quality. He said there's a similar condition in humans in which patients have reported feeling like they're drowning slowly in their own lungs, struggling to get oxygen around the body, leading to types of tiredness I had seen in you. The lethargic slowing down in which your heart and your arthritis, between your heart and your arthritis, you were incredibly ungrumbly. Every time Balana would try and run at you or pounce on you as a surprise, that even though you had certainly become cautious of young children in your later years, you knew it wasn't okay to bite, and if you were unhappy, you would move away. You had tried to avoid them the best you could, even when toddlers might try and chase after you. I'd come across Ludo trotting away from clumsy toddlers, screaming and crying after you in the courtyard. Sympathetic parents trying to explain that if an animal moves away and doesn't want to be touched, you need to learn to respect their boundaries. And occasionally nodding an apology my way, but not once did you ever retaliate to my knowledge. Even when an overexcited little boy tried to chase you down, you simply had your hiding spots where you knew children couldn't reach you. The way that you had known back in the forest how far a dog's leash would reach and what risk that created for you. We went home in a taxi again, you screaming the whole way, me trying to process what it all meant. At 11, you definitely hit old age, but you weren't old yet, not by my reckoning. People often commented on how young you looked, how well you kept your coat, how you really hadn't started to age in the eyes the way that some can. I secretly hoped that you might reach close to 20. I'd lived next door to a cat that lived to be in her mid-20s. She was blind and deaf during my childhood. She didn't get up too much, but as children we were always happy to see her. She was said to have passed peacefully in her sleep one day, or at least that's what I was told. With this news, I had started considering that time might look more like 3 to 5 years, but I could maybe hope for a few more. I found myself taking walks around the nature reserve, as I often did, imagining our future together. I'd always pictured it like a scene from a film. You, Blue, Mushroom, and I living in a proper house again out in the forest. I'd probably still get up early, as I quite enjoyed those early mornings. We'd go running through the forest together. With Mushroom having already passed, I'd found ways to graft the girls into that picture, following your lead as younger cats had often seemed to do, watching you tear through the forest up and down trees, zigzagging. I have to confess, I feel mountains of guilt for never being able to give you that dream, and for my multiple laps of the nature reserve without you, knowing you would have probably done anything you could to be there with me, just to run one more time. Over the next few months, you dutifully took your heart medicine twice a day, and your arthritis medicine in the morning. You'd often prefer to be out overnight, coming home in the mornings ready for breakfast, and your meds were almost always buried inside cream cheese. As was our tradition, you received your treat afterwards, and you stayed loyal to the schedule. On days I worked in the evening, you'd come and nudge me around the same time, a gentle reminder that you were waiting for our routine. I was often up still at 4 a.m. with insomnia, but you'd not turn up for breakfast until maybe 8. I found out later that you'd built your own routine, stopping off to visit Ella, the cat, on the way, asking for some of whatever she was having for breakfast. And you were so loved that nobody would deny you. You'd come home, knock on the balcony, or sit waiting on a chair patiently outside for me to uphold my duty. I'd let you in. Normally Blue or Balana were at the door to greet you, give you a sniff, And then you'd saunter in to decide if you wanted whatever they had been given for breakfast. Often the answer was, not really. You knew I had the fancy food stocked away in the cupboard, and that I would blend it with the less fancy food, as feeding four mouths was expensive, with expensive taste could get excessive. With your second home providing you still with such luxury every morning, yet the luxury of being picky and demanding, I suspect that your medication might have also impacted your appetite and how things tasted, but also you had clearly re-established your position in society again. A cat with many homes, much like every other place we'd lived. It occurred to me that you probably had other friends and other homes that I still do not know of in neighborhoods. Fans and admirers that would want to know the situation. So I set about writing to our local neighborhood group on social media. Hey group, warm-hearted message that with some sad information from the crazy cat lady who has a very social cat called Ludo. I wanted to firstly thank people for all the consideration they hold towards Ludo. He's quite a bold cat, very social, loves to be outdoors. I've had many people approach me and ask about him or ring my doorbell if he sneaks into the building, and I'm always so glad for this. I've even had a couple of dog owners reach out if their dogs have maybe startled Ludo, causing him to run off or similar, and I find this to be very considerate and thoughtful. Nobody owes us this, but it brings me joy to know I live in a neighborhood where people care. Overall, Ludo and I have pretty good communication, although he is still a cat who can't always be told, and I am a human, which is far worse by all accounts. He's currently 11 years old, and whilst this isn't really where he would have chosen to live, at our last place we would go running in the forest together, which isn't possible here. I'm grateful that he's patient and accepting of my faults. The reason I write this long message is a bit of a heads up. Yesterday, Ludo got diagnosed with HCM, which is a type of congenital heart failure, to add to his old age and arthritis in all four legs and lower back. We're trying to treat it with diuretics, medication, and hopefully that will keep his lungs clear and give him plenty of healthy years in his old age. But in case it doesn't happen, I might have to wish my sweet prince good night. As mentioned, he's a very social cat who doesn't tend to mind dogs too much at a distance, but I wanted to put that here so that people understand that if they see him out and about doing his thing, that he might be older than he looks and have a bit more pain than it seems. I've noticed as he's become older, he tends to avoid young children a little bit more, and I see him becoming more anxious of dogs and avoidant of doing things like running away or jumping to escape. This year, he started sleeping inside more, believe it or not. He stopped catching mice, and he seems a little more worried than I'm used to. Could be that the heart disease is making him too slow and tired to do the things he loves, and I will manage that in the best way I can. As a cat who has always needed to be outside as much as he can, I see risks of him not being able to get away from cars, people, or dogs in the way he has in the past. Yet, still not being willing to succumb to a life only indoors. If anybody does see anything that they think I should be aware of, or it looks like he's struggling, please feel free to reach out to me. As always, I've enjoyed being Ludo's cat mum, even though when he's been naughty and cheeky and a troublemaker, even when he's been naughty, cheeky, and a troublemaker, and I want to do my best for him in this time of uncertainty. I got him when I first moved to Sweden, and he is my oldest and dearest friend, who has stuck by me through everything. The outpour of love and support was incredible. Neighbors I hadn't even heard of sharing that they were sorry for his illness, your illness, and grateful for your company as they left to go to work, greeted by you on their balcony after a long day. You brought smiles to their faces and comfort for pets that they also missed. They said that they were grateful for the information, and they would look out for you a little bit extra. They called you their little friend. In the 3 months between your diagnosis and your death, I regret that I did not make better use of our time together. The days you came to nudge me, to get me to stop working, and I shrugged you off for another hour. The times you came to cuddle on my lap or make biscuits whilst I was busy focusing on something else, that I would scold you for asking for food and then not wanting to eat it, only coming back again to ask, when clearly I was the stupid one for not understanding what you were asking for. I arrogantly thought that I had another 3 years with you at least, not 3 months. I'm sorry for not appreciating you more during that time. And every day in your life we shared together. There were times I was tired, fed up. I was irritated by you scratching my furniture. All those were times wasted. Wasted opportunities to love you more. I'm sorry. On the day you went to sleep, I had gotten up and spent the day in the city with second daddy. We'd made plans that fell through, and I was sad, disappointed, irritated. I came home in the mid-afternoon, and you were inside for once and resting. I didn't want to go into the details of the next few hours, as you seemed to deteriorate quite quickly. And after calling an emergency vet, you started coughing a wheezy cough. It hit me that I would be lucky if I got another 24 hours with you. We waited for the extra medication, the dose of medication to help calm down your breathing. You were irritated by anything I said or did. You refused to take your regular medication. I covered it in cream cheese as per usual, and you looked at me in the eye and spat it out. I couldn't tell if it was defiance or if you'd given up. My emotional state, I offered you anything from the fridge that I thought you would like. Fresh salmon, a whole packet of ham, anything that I thought would help you feel better and get through. But you just seemed to get more and more tired. Ella, the cat's family, came over to check up on you, and I explained that what the emergency vet had told me. The extra medication will only work temporarily. You need to think about his quality of life. You need to bring him in. Moved to tears, your spare mum had brought over your tins of favorite food to comfort you as she said her goodbyes. After they left, I tried to get you into a carrier and book a taxi. You had a little fight left in you, attempting to reject the carrier which provided me with some comfort as we started on the journey. True to tradition, you waited the whole taxi ride. No, you wailed the whole taxi ride. Not your typical angry, betrayed wail, but this time a sadder, resigned wail. You needed to state your protest, but you did not have the energy to actively object. As I had picked you up, you made a horrifying sound, like an emphysemic smoker struggling for breath. I had to be careful not to put pressure on your chest as I lifted you. The vet had warned me that your lungs could collapse, and I did not know how to manage that in accordance to your lack of cooperation. I held you close as they helped to put you into a deep sleep, relax you. I felt your body gradually give in as I told you stories of running in the forest with Mushcat, struggling between keeping my voice soothing and breaking into deep sobs. Your second daddy and I held you, stroked you, reminded you of how loved you were. As you can imagine, life without you is hard. At the time of writing this, it's been a week, and I'm struggling to adapt. I wake up in the morning expecting to see you on the balcony, ready to turn up your nose at breakfast. I see snow outside and I panic that you could be outside feeling cold. I go out to throw my trash and I expect you to run towards me to do a quick lap and come back inside, but you aren't there, and a piece of my heart died alongside you last week. The outburst of tears will subside eventually. I'm having to retrain my brain to not look for you at the pizzeria, not to whistle for you on my way home from the store. Your medication is still by the front door, and your cream cheese is still in the fridge. Blue sleeps on the blanket you used to lie on. Whilst it's covered in your fur, I'm not ready to wash it yet. I updated my message to the neighbors. It read, I'm sorry to let Ludo's friends and fans know that tonight he's had to go to sleep. His heart was just too big in the end. It caused his lungs to fill with liquid and impact his ability to breathe, which brought into question his quality of life as he was starting to drown. Earlier, he made it clear after trying to cough up a hairball and struggling to catch his breath that his lungs were in a bad way, so I took him to rest about 2 hours ago. As you can imagine, it's it's very hard to come to terms with after 11 years, but I've been so glad for his friendship, and every ounce of pain I feel I'd be willing to pay tenfold. Thank you for sharing him with me. He was never really my cat after all, but I was his human. I don't know if the hurt will ever go away, and I sit wondering if I could have done anything differently, if I had acted selfishly. Could I have found ways to protect you better? The reality is I probably couldn't. I cried down the phone to my sister earlier and she listened to my pain and asked me, can you see the beauty in your pain? That you hurt as much as you do is testament to how much you loved him and how much he loved you in return. Let it hurt. Feel your feelings. It will take time and that's okay. Let it happen. I called my mum in tears today too. She reassured me that I'd done the best that anybody could have done for you. That I'd given you a fantastic life, more than many others would have done, or even considered for a cat. I hadn't given up on you, nor had you given up on me. In tricky circumstances, we found ways to make it work. There were times I betrayed you and you forgave me. And then I stopped writing. I will finish this, maybe. It has a word count of 20,000 words currently. It's so strange to see that it's still so raw, but it's so nice to remember all those things. I will finish this and re-record this and try and do it without tears.